Chapter 13. With the dreadnought Leviathan sunk, and the 8th Fleet of the Arcadian Imperial Army effectively lost, the people of Arcadia, though still unaware of their enemy princess's resurfacing, slowly but surely began to question their place in the war. The emperor had addressed them with words of assurance, claiming Rosaria no threat against his domain, not even without the might of the 8th, but these words did not satisfy the imperial senate. Without sympathy, they hounded the emperor for answers and solutions, reminding him of Rosaria's ever-looming ferocity and Ashalia's thirst for power. They insisted Vane could not handle such matters. They demanded Gramis take his country's future into serious consideration. Thus the emperor called them to assembly so that they might be dealt with conclusively, though not all went as he had hoped. The senators laid out their complaints all afternoon, one after the other in tiring succession, heedless of their own finicky rudeness, drawing the session out until the sun began to fall, and then at last returning to the issue that had sparked their persistent concern in the first place.
The Rosarian Empire assembles a vast host under guise of martial exercises,
Chairman Gregoroth stated coldly.
It is our belief they wait for the proper pretext. The sooner to make their strike against Arcadia. The loss of the Leviathan and her fleet at such a time comes as a most grievous blow,
another senator added.
Were Rosaria to invade,
the chairman went on,
the battle would be hard fought, and had Lord Vane not deployed the fleet so capriciously, we would not now find ourselves in such perilous circumstance.
Gramis withheld a bitter sigh.
Vane shall be made to answer for his actions, if it is the will of the Senate. Excellency,
one of the lesser senators said with placid satisfaction,
though he be your son, justice must be served. A convenient thing, justice,
said the emperor.
It seems to greatly favor my dear little boy as of late. A most lamentable situation for us all,
another senator replied.
Oh!
Gregoroth almost smiled.
For Lord Vane, perhaps, yet surely Master Lamont will make for a fine emperor. That is out of the question,
said Gramis.
Your Highness,
the chairman maintained,
the order of inheritance as it stands now is only legitimate in cases in which the nearest blood relative has not yet reached the age of reason. It is meant to preserve innocence, not to shelter a preferential son. Master Lamont has seen his first decade as blissfully as any child, perhaps you underestimate the extent of his precociousness. Vane is already wary of his position,
Gramis insisted.
I will not incite such rivalry.
Another senator spoke up.
Are you really so selfish as to consider your family before your country?
He shook his head.
You do not know my sons as I do. Monty would not willingly usurp Vane's power. And even with your guidance, his ability to rule a country is still questionable, he is yet young. But he will not remain young forever,
the senator pressed.
Already he busies himself unraveling Dr. Sid's tangled skein. The boy knows more of this mysterious Nethysite than all here combined. Master Lamont has found his role to play, and pursues it with great enthusiasm. Ah, yes,
Gramis replied.
And who would set him at such tasks? What matter?
Asked Gregoroth.
Lord Vane himself once saw his elder brothers brought to justice, did he not? At your Excellency's behest, as I recall.
Much to the emperor's relief, a fit of coughing claimed his voice at that moment, allowing him time to think out his response. Gramis's elder sons had been men of good faith and strong virtue, so naturally, they sought to overthrow him. Both had expressed disappointment in his treatment of other countries, but when their plot was uncovered, the emperor had nevertheless been taken off guard. He could not risk involving the judges or his troops, they could not be trusted. Vane was the only logical choice. His loyalty was unwavering by necessity, he was stuck with his family, and would do anything for his father's approval. Though the older two were only a year apart, a 5-year gap stood between them and Vane, it seemed only natural that he would have an inferiority complex. But sending Vane to murder his brothers remained Gramus's greatest regret. Vane had never fully recovered. He was only 15 at the time, after all. When his mother found out, she stabbed herself through the heart right in front of him. Right in front of them both. They didn't speak for 6 months afterwards, not even at the funeral, and Vane had never been comfortable around his stepmother, who was little more than a year his senior, and the daughter of the deceased Judge Farinas, his close friend and bodyguard growing up. He addressed her as ma'am, and she addressed him as sir. It was awkward at best. It wasn't until a week after Lamont's birth that Vane began to exhibit signs of humanity again. The Empress died in labor, and Vane had no interest in his new half-brother, but the night of the burial, something seemed to snap. Gramus always felt that Vane had witnessed his sorrow and realized that he loved his second wife more than his first, whom he had only married through arrangement, and thus sought to punish him by destroying all that he had left of her, Monty. He left the ceremony and returned to the palace, then went straight to the nursery and ordered Drace to leave him with his brother. Gramus never knew what exactly Vane's intentions were that night, to honestly spend some time with Lamont, or to smother him, or to throw him out the window and jump out after, but he had never actually seen his baby brother until then, and thus had no way of anticipating his own reaction. When Gramus arrived, he found Vane sitting on the floor in the corner, holding Monty tenderly in front of him, just looking into his eyes. Monty, in turn, appeared quite content, despite being woken in the middle of the night, and gazed back at Vane with wonderment.
"What's his name?"
Vane had asked, not bothering to look up at his father.
"He doesn't have one yet,"
Gramus had said hesitantly in reply.
"Can we call him Farinas? After his grandfather?" "No. Lamont, that was his real name, wasn't it?"
The oddity of the situation melted in hindsight. For a time, Gramus had trusted Vane with Monty, had thought not of competition or past deeds or the throne both princes cared so dearly for. Vane held his brother on a pedestal, and, just as the Senate insisted, he would not stand for their father to do the same while he remained nothing more than the first Empress's son. Gramus knew all too well that even though he was the boy's father, Monty belonged exclusively to Vane, and Vane would do whatever he saw fit with him if no interference was provided. With this illness upon him, the Emperor had no choice but to cut Monty's childhood short.
"If you'll forgive my frankness, my lord,"
one of the senators said graciously,
"your health fails you ever rapidly. We know as well as you do that Lord Vane will not stand idly by while the younger prince takes the throne. We do not seek to condemn one who is not yet able to effectively defend himself."
Another senator stepped in, equally polite.
"Bear in mind that it is also no secret that you favor the child. Either you must deal with the elder, or the elder will deal with the younger."
Gramus shook his head.
"Vane loves his brother."
He sighed weakly.
"Fraternity has not stayed his hand in the past. We know the difficulty of such a decision,"
said the chairman,
"but you may put yourself at ease, Lord Gramus. Regardless of which emperor we serve, so long as the Senate watches over her, Arcadia's well-being will ever be ensured."
The emperor faintly hung his head, not weighing the decision, but instead justifying it. Vain was a threat. Monty would understand. There was a country and a war to consider. And at heart he knew that his little boy was not so little anymore.
I thank you for your understanding of my indecision,
he said at length,
but I now find it not as difficult as it at first appeared. By your will, I shall bid my sons return to Arcades. Lamont shall assume the throne while I yet live to advise him, and Vane will accept it or perish.